I was inspired by a lot of what Eric said because really community is so important, and community is a big part of permaculture. So my talk is on flow and using permaculture principles to conduct or to manage documentation projects. And a little bit about me, I'm a tech writer, and I've been an instructional designer and a tech writer for about 25 years. I'm also a practicing permaculturalist. How many people are familiar with the concept of permaculture? Yay, wow, a lot, great. So I'm a practicing permie. I've only been doing it about 3 years officially. And a fun fact is over the last 3 years, I replaced my lawn with a food forest and single-sourced the training and documentation materials at the project that I'm on. And they're not that far apart as you might think. They both use the same principles. The project I'm on right now is a really long, it's been a 5-year project. We're documenting and training on a complete restructure of the California Department of Corrections, their software system. So it's been a pretty extensive, challenging project. So kind of what I want to do is introduce permaculture, give a quick overview of it, and describe some of the foundation principles and how those can be used to manage a documentation project, and then also to hopefully give examples where I can. And I'll have a question and answer. I don't know how well that'll work in the environment, but I'll save space for questions and answers, and then I'll do my conclusion and be out of here. So permaculture is it's a word that was coined from a combination of permanent and agriculture, and its primary use is in landscape and agricultural systems. But that was where it began, and it began by Bill Mollison, who was an Australian guy. He was a professor and a wildlife cataloger and that sort of thing. He was teaching permaculture in Australia, and David Holmgren, one of his grad students, said, we need to write this down. And so they came up with a couple of books on permaculture. It really put it on the map in 78 and 88. And then this is from the introduction to the permaculture design guide, and it's a really nice summary because, of course, he came up with it. But the philosophy behind permaculture is one of working with rather than against nature, of protracted and thoughtful observation rather than protracted and thoughtless action, of looking at systems and all their functions rather than asking only one yield of them, and of allowing systems to demonstrate their own evolution. And I think you can see in that there's a lot of space for allowing. It's not, you can direct, but you're not necessarily putting your commanding it. It's not that sort of a situation. So I did a quick search for before and after, and this will give you some examples of what people are doing with permaculture. On the top, there's a couple of gardens at houses that people have taken their property in either a blank lot or a newer development, and within a very short span had a very productive environment. On the bottom are broad scale applications where to the left, to the right is the Loess Plateau, and these are both from Jeff Lawton. And if I'm sure a lot of you have heard of him. He's a very influential teacher, very very smart. The last one is from a video he did on greening the desert. It's in YouTube. It's worthwhile watching. But he started with this salted desert in right by the Sea of Galilee, or the Red Sea, and turned it into a productive oasis. It's pretty incredible stuff. So a little closer to home, I told you I yanked out my yard and put in a food forest. So that was my yard before I started, and it's a fine yard. To me, it looked a little sterile, and so I ripped it out. And this photo I took day before yesterday in the afternoon. So you can see that I had 36 fruit trees on that property, which is a lot. But I get a lot of fruit now, and in the years I'm going to get quite a bit more. Closer to home is City Repair, and they're a Portland-based group, really fabulous group. The reason I want to bring them up is they're venturing from agriculture into community. And so their whole, not their whole, but one of the things they do is they build community in neighborhoods by reclaiming the streets from cars to allow the people who live in that neighborhood to give them a space to communicate. And so people who lived there for 10 years and haven't talked to their neighbor now have a great location. Another one that's really worthwhile looking up on YouTube, because some of the stuff they did is just so incredible. It's really magical. So Bill Mollison was the founder of it, and those are some of his kind of his summation of some of the major themes that flow through permaculture. You know, and they, when you see it, you go, okay, you know, you work with nature. A lot of permaculture is really common sense, and I think of it as everything old is new again, in a way. He looked at a lot of how indigenous cultures deal with their environment, how they interact with it, how they perceive it, and their relationship with the creatures and the individuals that they share their space with. And I'm going to bring this around to documentation, don't worry. But so he looked at, okay, let's look at how we can do this in a holistic manner. There's a few of his sayings. And then David Holmgren, the guy he worked with, he's a little more colorful. And so he came up with a different model. It's not a different model, it's a different way of expressing it, with ethics in the center and the principles kind of as a, you know, like numbers on a clock or spokes in a wheel that support it. Here's an example. I don't know if it's really legible. I couldn't find a really good high resolution. But permacultureprinciples.com is David Holmgren's site, and that has an amazing explanation on a lot of those. Some of them observe and interact, catch and store energy, obtain a yield. Permaculture is not about you know, not getting a result. It's about getting as many results as you can for the least amount of input that you need to do. It's about building a resilient system, and that's exactly what I try to do, you know, in any documentation project that I'm on. I want to develop a system that can be easily maintained by those who come, you know, after me, whether it be the client who's maintaining it or not. I won't spend a lot of time on the ethics part because I want to go right to the principles, really. And I mean, it's really beautiful ethics, and I think the ethics really ought to underpin everything we do. There's not a lot to say about it other than it's all about respect for the community, respect for the individuals who are on your team, and then you know, sharing equally, whether that be information or money or whatever. So I want to get into to some of the principles and how I've been able to use them. So you'll remember this quote, and what I did is I was thinking about how would I organize that into you know, logical order that would work for this presentation, and I kind of came up with what I call the ode, and it's not the best on there, obviously, but it's basically observe, design, and evolve, because it sounds good. I like the 3 letters, and observe is always the first thing. Design is actually where the bulk of the actual work happens, and that could really be design build, because it's the bulk of the effort, and then evolve is where you do a lot of your lessons learned and that sort of. So in permaculture, when you get to that observation stage, typically you go to a landscape and you'll just sit there and you'll look at, kind of with an open mind and without preconceived ideas, like the flow of the land, the way that it's shaped. Where's the water coming? Where the wind? You know, where's your fire danger coming from? That sort of thing. You're just really kind of cataloging some things and making a note. But in general, you're also getting a feel for. The only thing I can describe it is, what does the land want to be? You know, what's the highest destiny that it has? And so that's really what you do is you work on allowing that expression to come to fruition. And so, you know, when you're looking, you look at patterns and flows of energies. Now think of this in documentation. I've got another slide that'll kind of tie it more closely, but keep that in mind. So are there distinct phases that go through those energy flows? And, well, I guess corporate culture, you're not doing that in permaculture, but that really affects, I don't know, I do a lot of consulting, so I go into different companies, and they have very different cultures. The way the information flows and the volume at which it flows and the restrictions that are placed upon it sometimes are staggering, the differences that there are. So, you also look at, okay, it's going to take a certain amount of work to complete this project, and it's going to last for such and such, for how many months or how many years, and really then what's the goal? What are you trying to achieve at the end of the project, right? So, in this, a lot of this is a different way of saying the same thing. This is more about patterns, but one of the things I really want to point out on this, and we'll talk about it a little bit later, but really, just as you want the land to express its highest expression, you want your people who are on your team to be able to do the same thing. And so I think it's very important and often overlooked that we consider their needs and their path of growth and how supported they are for us. So you also look at, hey, is there a way to reuse resources? So we want to do maybe single sourcing. We want to make the products that we're creating do multiple functions. So when I go into documentation, I think, okay, living systems have natural proclivities. They all have a certain tendency that they have, and team dynamics are exactly the same. I mean, they need to express themselves. So keeping in mind the scope, the timeline, and all that sort of stuff, and the culture, when you get to your end of the observation, you're ready to get into design. And I think observation is one of those areas that we have a tendency to skip. I mean, I guess this is the analysis phase in a lot of ways. It's where you look at your task analysis and your audience analysis and then your needs analysis. So you're really trying to discover all the information of really what is it that you want to do and how do you want to get there. So after the observation phase, you go into design. And one of the big things with permaculture are zones. And zones are often thought of as the areas of access. So like outside your kitchen door is like a zone that you're going to visit many times a day. So that's zone one. If you've got a lot of property, the back pasture is going to be something you're going to visit once a week or something. So that's maybe zone 3 or 4. But and that'll work with access of zones of information, which is how your readers and access information, how you as writers actually obtain that information from the subject matter experts. So you work with the energies. It's always easier to go with the flow than it is to fight the wind or fight the prevailing culture. You can make a small change early, and it'll have a big impact. It's easier to change things up at the beginning of the stream than to try to do it at the delta, right, where it's maybe much wider and much faster. Value diversity. Edge is where the action is. Edge is really big in permaculture because in a landscape, the edge where the forest meets the sea or the forest meets the plain, there's a lot of nutrient exchange, a lot of biodiversity. People or beings that can live in each of those areas often intermingle right there. So the edge is huge, and it's also when I think of edge, I think of like the edge that Eric was talking about. Where different teams can get together. So like testing and documentation, or the call support center. You can get a lot of information from them in the hallway that you might not get in a meeting, and having really good interaction there is, I think, key. When I was on the project I'm at, we were given restrictions to where all questions had to go through me. I was the doc lead to the lead of testing, and then they dispersed it. Horrible. I mean, it was a really inefficient system, and it was really easy to block that flow of information. But if we could spread out that edge, more people could communicate more frequently, we were a lot more efficient and much more successful. So zones of access are it's how easy is it to get that information, and how often do you need to access it. It's really kind of key to a needs analysis in a lot of ways of you're trying to determine what information you need to impart. And so you might also think of zones as being where does that information go in documents, right? What kind of a document would it fit? And like Eric said, as far as when he was hiking on the trail, cooperation and community is the natural order of things. It's the natural order, and it's much more common than we think. I mean, we think of competition as always being the big thing, and I think open source is great about this because it's so much more in about cooperation and collaboration than it is about competition. It does all that. It increases communications, allows you to divide work and distribute it a lot more easily and more efficiently, and makes the environment much more stable and more enjoyable to be in. There's a great quote too. Richard Telford he's the guy who's helping working with Holmgren on that permaculture principles site, so it's worth a visit. But the important part of that is that the collaborative process is often ignored because of the urgency of direct action. And I think that's, again, we think it takes too long to do that. I thought it took too long to do that. I was originally before this a much more of a, we need to get this done. Here's our doc plan. You do this, you do this, you do this. And after I started studying permaculture a little bit, I'm realizing that's not the best approach because I'm sure like you guys, you have a very intelligent group of people working with you, and everybody has their own motivations. Everybody's got what inspires them. They've got their own desires, and that's a lot of information that I was ignoring. So mea culpa on that. The way we ended up finishing that project was. People were crying when they had to leave, not because they lost their job, but because the project was ending. They knew that. But just it was like, wow, I'm really going to miss working with this team. It was such a great experience, and it was. I mean, we're all still friends because it's great when you can allow, when you give space for people to really shine, and that so. So in design, bringing that around to documentation. So if you consider your information needs, how frequently they need it, how urgent it is. In the project I'm on now, it's a prison system. They're upgrading their software. It's pretty important that the information be accurate and that because people can and have died when information isn't distributed correctly in that kind of a situation. I think great to increase your edge. Find avenues of information that you can get and work those. And I don't mean like networking, where it's kind of fakey, but really you're both aligned to the same goal. Distribute and chunk work if you can. We used XML. We used Madcat Flare, and when we single sourced our stuff. So we were able to, after the initial analysis, the project owners went out and they actually created the structure for the whole project, and then we were able to just assign work. So if one person was really fast in that area or hit a roadblock, they could just jump over and help the other. We were able to produce our products in well under the time frame that we were given. It was a very efficient and happy way to work. I can tell you it. The time before we had a hugely dysfunctional team, and it was such a pleasure to that's probably why everybody was crying. They were remembering how horrible it was. But so after you've designed and built it and that sort of thing, then we get to this stage of evolution, and my evolution's I think you need to know that the system is going to evolve and give it space to do that. You're going to have to tweak whatever you come up with because all living systems change, right? And the people, your audience is a living system, your writers are a living system, even the corporation, the technology, for goodness sake, that's growing and evolving every day. grow your soil, refine your system. The grow your soil is kind of a real adage in permaculture, because you can't control necessarily the water that's falling on the property and that sort of thing, but you can control the quality of the soil that you have. And I really equate soil with people, and so I think it's imperative when you're managing a documentation project to really let your people grow, and let my people grow. I like that. So help your team evolve. Give them new tasks that challenge them. I mean, I think for the most part, everybody wants to do well, and everybody wants to help. There's the rare instance, and it's usually when you've got where people are unhappy. But then there's you figure out what that is and resolve it and go forward. So, and when you're doing that in documentation, it's that lessons learned, measurements, look at your statistics, figure out how people are using your product, how can I make that more efficient, how can I give them what they need if they're not getting it. If you're getting a lot of help calls on one thing, you need to, that's a documentation, it's not necessarily a documentation problem, but it's probably a documentation opportunity, where you can really, you can fit that in and resolve it. Yeah, be open to new ideas. Keep training your team. I mean, that's just free exploration time. Now, I know a few people that I talked with, not a lot, but a few people, their company sent them here. And I think that's great, because this kind of a forum is perfect. I like it because I get a lot of ideas, and it gets me thinking in a different mode of how do I approach things, and even if the talk's on APIs and I don't do APIs, I can learn something from it, because there's valuable bits of information and everything. So I think we've got a few minutes for questions. Are there any questions anyone has? That oh yeah, in the back. There's a mic coming your way. Well, I don't know if his name's Mike, but.
Did the turnaround in the team's happiness have anything to do with the tools? I heard you say Madcap Flare. Were you using something else before, and did that make a difference?
Yeah, okay, so were we using other tools before that turnaround, and did that make a difference? So ours was kind of a combo of things. So we were originally doing, training materials were done in Microsoft Word, and they were done by a team of instructional designers. Then the online help was still done in Flare. We were using that from the beginning. But the team, the project manager, the training manager, and the instructional designer lead were both very much of the mindset that they were two different camps. That instructional design was unrelated really to documentation, and so there was a disconnect in that regard right from the beginning. So I think there was a lot of, information wasn't shared freely. There was a lot of roadblocks that were happening. Not to put too fine a point on it, but both of them got fired, and then I was the last one standing, so I morphed in to take over that position, and so I've done both in my career, and I like doing both, and I think they're much more like siblings than they are even cousins. I mean, they both have the same end. We want to educate our audience. We want to help them as best we can, and they have different time frames. Training is typically very short-lived. Documentation tends to be longer-lived. So we were able to share a lot of the same information by just bringing everything into Flare and reusing the content. But the key thing is that we didn't have that divide anymore, so that whatever we needed to document, we were able to do right away and get that. That didn't make sense. Sorry. But we were able to, just go forward.
I think I've got the mic. I hope this doesn't sound like too much of a challenge, but I found myself thinking about the challenges of establishing permaculture in a large-scale toxic environment.
Okay.
Can
you speak up? I can't quite hear you.
Is that better?
Yeah, better.
So the challenges of establishing permaculture in a large toxic environment, which leads me to ask you, because I think these two things are related too, how well does this kind of approach, or do you think this kind of approach can scale to a very large enterprise where you've got documentation teams working across products in a nominally common environment? And what role do you see for individual contributors? Maybe that's analogous to specific small ecosystems in that toxic permaculture.
Right.
In any case, I mean, I like what you've had to say, but I keep trying to think, okay, how can I as an individual contributor in what I've just confessed is a toxic environment, take any of this back to management, short of the solution you just suggested, which is firing people?
Right. Yeah, because that's the least desirable end, right? But sometimes it happens. I don't know. I think what individuals can do is to try to establish connections. I think work on that part, non-threatening kind of things, but just work on developing avenues, and perhaps in a gentle way, letting know what your particular needs or desires are, right? So it's like, hey, I'd really like to help out with whatever this is. God, it's a big question without knowing specifics. I think I was able to sell the system we ended up with, the single sourcing system, based on cost, because we were able to save about 20 to 30%. And we went from a team of 7 to a team of 4. And we were actually more efficient than we were with a team of 7. That was a big selling point, but it took about a year and a half to really get that through, and it happened at a time of transition where they were probably more open to actually making a change. I don't know. Can we get together later and talk about that? And okay, good.
Those are two things I have in my favor right now. Time of change and a manager who really likes the argument from cost. So
right, everybody loves to save money, right? So it's always doesn't mean it's always better, but it means it costs less.
Hi, I think my question overlaps, but also as a manager of a team, I agree with almost everything you said about flow and about observing and about letting things emerge out of systems and about developing people and so on and so forth, and also about collaboration versus competition. But there's always a need to convince everyone that you can get everything done on time and so on and so forth. So when you manage up and make the argument for enough time and space to do this sort of thing, what are your strategies to make it happen? Do you ever speak in this kind of language up the chain, or do you speak the language of cost up the chain and the language of competition up the chain, and then speak the language of collaboration and flow downward?
I do not use competition language up the chain. I don't think that's my concern. I mean, that's not what I want to. That's not what I want to convey, or what I want to even propose as a solution. So I speak about the efficiencies of putting together a system that is actually well thought out and can accomplish the goal. I put together a presentation for them, and I really talked about it. It wasn't necessarily on permaculture, but it was, with that as a background, kind of saying, hey, if we do this can happen. If we do that, this can happen. And this is why we need to do that. We can increase that avenue of information flow, but we can also make the project more stable and resilient, right? Because if you have one person who knows everything and they win the lottery, you're out of luck, right? Your system is at risk. And so if you have a really cross-trained team, and some people are just going to be better at certain things because that's what they love to do. But if you have a team that can kind of fill in really well, you've got a pretty efficient, you can chunk that work and really get it to where you don't have dead times, because if one person's blocked, they can just help someone else out, and then that tends to come around. You get into a culture where everybody feels like obligated to help each other. You know what I mean? I mean, they're not obligated, but they're thankful that someone helped them, and they want to return that favor, because it really is human nature, I think, to collaborate and to cooperate rather than to compete. Now, I know that not all environments are like that. Ours certainly was not like that, and I don't know. I don't know if it could have happened in the environment had the instructional design lead and the training manager stayed, to be honest. But they didn't, and it did, so I like that. Any other questions? We done? All right, cool. I'll just kind of quickly do my conclusion. Obviously, I think that a permaculture approach is a great way to design and execute a system, a training plan, and a documentation project. I think it's great because it's resilient and sustainable, and you can really customize it to the needs of your audience as well as the company that's supporting it. So there you go. That's my shtick. Here's somewhere here. Here's my contact information. Same. I only have one photo. It's kind of a selfie, I think, too. It's like push the button, go back. Nah, that didn't work. But anyway, if you have anything you need, just email me or whatever. My website's pretty lame. It got hacked, and I took it down and just put up a couple things. I don't know who'd want to hack, a writer's website, right? So, but I'll put the slide deck up if it's not available. I don't know if they're doing it, but I'll put it up so that anyone who wants to see it can download it. If you don't see it, send me an email, and I'll do that. So thank you very much. I appreciate your time and attention.